the version history that broke our alibi. I make my living inside other people's drafts. Companies hire me when a deal needs a ribbon or a scandal needs grammar. I enter a document, turn on suggestion mode, and teach the mess to pass for intention. It is an odd way to pay rent, editing the lives of strangers for daylight. The side effect is that I trust text more than I trust talk. Talk forgets. Text keeps receipts. Arya's novel began as a dare. We were at a fundraiser where men in navy jackets said synergy like they were nomming a saint, and a poet in a gold suit announced a silent auction for a month at a writer's residency in the Hudson Valley. Arya raised her paddle with a smile shaped like an alibi and won. She had always been a storm contained in a person, a strategist who could make a boardroom feel like theater and a kitchen feel like confession. She'd been my client first, then my friend, then the thing that makes the word complicated feel like a lazy noun. I was with Myra then, a woman who kept plants alive without trying and could silence a room without lifting her voice. I liked the future we were pretending to build. I also liked the way Arya said my name when she wanted me to come closer without moving. When Arya asked if I'd be her accountability partner for the residency, I framed it as work. Every night she would drop pages into a shared folder. I would make suggestions, nudge a sentence, protect a secret. I told myself this was adult supervision. What I meant was permission. The residency had rules that pretended to be gentle. No guests after dark. Communal dinners twice a week. Phones hidden in a bowl painted like a lake. The cottages had porches that believed in long sighs and windows that forgave fog. I drove Arya up with a trunk full of snacks disguised as affection, carried her suitcase in like a man who respects doors, and left before the light made me sentimental. Back home, the city resumed its noise. I waited for the first chapter, and the discipline it would demand from both of us. She wrote well angry. The opening pages had teeth. A woman who held a room by the throat. A man who wanted to be chosen by the version of himself he liked best. The sentences rang like glass. I suggested less glass and more skin. She replied with a margin note that said stop making honesty sound like carpentry, and added a line about a mouth hovering above a collarbone that made my coffee taste like trouble. We were careful. We kept it in the file. On the fourth night, she shared a document titled Simply Seen by the Lake. The prose was different, looser, tender in an unguarded way. Two characters walked to the water at midnight and did not touch, and somehow it felt as if they had done everything. I praised restraint and asked how the scene served the arc. She replied with a smiley face, which is what people send when they intend to behave and know they won't. The problem arrived as a feature. She invited me not only to her chapters but to the residency's collaborative doc for house guidelines. It was a cheerful file full of chore rotations and notes about the coffee grinder. Version history was on by default. I didn't mean to click it. I meant to see what time breakfast was so I could time my comments for when she'd be caffeinated and brave. But when I opened the history, there was her name and another. A J. Their edits arrived in a duet. Her removing a joke about raccoons, him adding a line about the moon. And because the app believes in timestamps more than in discretion, I could see the moment their cursors overlapped in the same paragraph, arguing whether silence should be described as gentleness or threat. Jay was Jonah. I knew him by context, the novelist her group revered in a kiss-the-ring way, the one who published sentences that sounded like sin repenting. He taught one Saturday a month at a loft with a skylight and no heat. Arya had once said his brain made her want to be an instrument. I had said something unwise in response and pretended it was a joke. I clicked away. I wrote my notes. I told myself I was not a jealous animal. Then a new document arrived hours later. This one titled line edits Picnic, and the version history showed their names again, stacked like a confession. It wasn't proof of anything except proximity. Proximity is enough when your body speaks a dialect your ethics only half understand. I visited on the weekend. Myra went to see her sister. I told Arya I would bring lemons, the good kind, the ones that make water feel like hope. She texted me a gate code and a map with a heart and the words "Be cool." The cottages smelled like balsam and drafts. Residents in sweaters thrown like afterthoughts waved without wanting to talk. Arya stepped onto the porch as if the whole place were lighting itself to flatter her. She was barefoot, hair up, wearing a sweater the color of a story I would have paid to be in. We hugged like we remembered the terms. Be cool lasted until we were inside and the door decided to weigh something. We didn't go past what YouTube would flag. We went right up to it and stared. Mouths, breath, the slope where her shoulder meets her neck. The way her fingers find my wrist when she's saying yes without letting it land. I remembered that the most dangerous intimacy is the kind no one can photograph. After, on her couch, we ate crackers like adults pretending midnight snacks are bravery. She pulled a blanket over both our knees and opened her laptop like contraband. I said no, and the version of me that returns emails for money said yes. We looked at sentences and made them worse and better. Around 2, we were just a pair of people too awake for sleep and too gentle for anything else. Then headlights swept the ceiling and a car door shut half a field away, and Arya's body remembered crowd etiquette. She dropped the blanket. She closed the laptop. She smiled with her mouth but not her forehead. Jonah knocked the way men knock when they think their names have seniority. Arya stood without making a sound and flashed me a look that felt like an apology and an order. I slipped into the tiny kitchen and listened to my blood. "Hey," she said at the door, a single syllable that managed greeting and border both. "You left your markups in the studio," he said, and the angle of his voice put him in his 40s and too handsome for my future. "I can get them in the morning," she said. "I'm up," he said. There was a small pause you can measure in confessionals and essays. The residency's dumb cat chirped. Arya leaned against the frame, a posture that makes men believe in their good intentions. He said her name again, this time like an argument. She laughed softly, which is how women survive men like us. They spoke for a minute about a line neither of them loved and a sentence that made her feel like a noun. He asked if she wanted to walk to the dock. She said she was editing. He said he could wait while she finished. She said, "I'm asleep." He laughed, which is sometimes a mercy. When he left, she locked the door, turned off the lights, and came to the kitchen like a person who wants to be known. "He taught me the difference between wanting and writing about wanting," she said. "I outran that lesson until last week." "Did he ask?" I said, and made the question sound like a doorstop. "He always asks," she said. "That isn't the problem. The problem is that I like being the person he imagines I am in the paragraph before the ending." "And me," I said. "You're the person who keeps the ending honest," she said. That was either the most generous thing anyone had ever said to me or the meanest. We didn't try to sleep. Dawn told on us. I left before the breakfast bell. The bowl of phones on the common table caught the light like a warning. On the drive home, the radio spoke in facts about weather and finance, none of which could be edited. Back in the city, Myra asked how the country smelled and whether my lungs had learned new virtues. I kissed her in the doorway and told her she had glitter in her hair, which is something I say when I want to remember why I chose a life with fewer declarations. She slid a pot onto the stove and said "I love you" without waiting for the same music back. I said "I love you" because it was true. It just wasn't enough that morning to stop me from checking a document later that afternoon like a sinner, refreshing a news alert. Version history is petty. It shows you who arrived and when and what they changed and whether they meant it. Tuesday at 23:11, Arya deleted a paragraph where a man found a woman in the hallway and said nothing because everything important had already been decided by their feet. Tuesday at 23:12, Jonah restored the paragraph and added a line about the smell of pine wanting to be forgiven. Tuesday at 23:14, Arya accepted the line. Tuesday at 23:19, a comment appeared from her that read simply "Leave the door closed." He replied with a check mark. The world inside the file felt smaller than the one in my chest. I could have asked her to pick. That is the sport men prefer when they are losing at every other one. Instead, I asked for what I actually needed. Write a scene with the man who doesn't make your sentences prettier, I said in the margin. Write the person who makes you braver when there isn't a doc. She responded with nothing. At midnight, she shared a new document titled The Clean Ending. It was a scene where two people return the keys they don't own and admit that desire is not proof of anything except appetite. The last line was a sentence you could live under. We stayed because someone had to teach the room the difference between love and rehearsal. I wanted to put my mouth on her name. Arya came back to the city with a draft and a rash of interviews on her calendar. Jonah sent her a blurb that made her sound like the thing he loves most, which is himself refined by encounter. I wrote her bio in a tone that would pass at a bank and sent it to her manager. I cooked with Myra and helped assemble an IKEA bookcase with the righteous fury of a person who believes in instructions. The launch party was in a room that wants applause like oxygen. Arya wore a dark dress that fit like an answer. Jonah kissed both her cheeks like he'd invented etiquette. People said sentences that used the word incandescent without blushing. I stood by the back wall and pretended to be the kind of man who knows how to hold a glass without looking like a prop. When there was finally air, Arya drifted over and pressed her shoulder to mine, our bodies finding the angle they always do when the room is pretending none of us are animals. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" I said. "For the part where you made me write the scene I didn't want," she said. "It's always the only one worth keeping," I said. She nodded and then glanced toward the door where Jonah stood looking at her like a coastline he had paid to rename. She said his name once, without affection or contempt, then looked back at me and smiled in that way that says, "I know exactly why you're leaving before I ask." I left. I texted Myra to ask if she wanted dessert, and she wrote only yes. The next morning the folder pinged with one more change. It was small. On page 2 of the acknowledgments, after thanking her parents and her editor and the residency cat and the god of coffee, Arya added a line I did not deserve, to N, who kept the ending honest. She didn't use my name. She didn't need to. I took a screenshot and then deleted it. Some evidence doesn't want to be archived. Myra found the book on our kitchen table a week later and read that line without blinking. She closed the cover and came to stand behind me, her chin on my shoulder. "I love you," she said, and in her voice there was an inventory of things I had been, and things I might still be, and things she would not let me become. I turned and held her like a man who knows where home is when the lights are up. We kissed in a way that would bore an audience and save a life. I still live in documents. I still fix endings and make beginnings less shy. Sometimes at night, when Myra is asleep with her hand open on the sheet like she's accepting a better dream, I open a blank file and write a title and nothing else. The cursor blinks a question I have learned not to answer too quickly. Then I close the laptop and put my mouth on the place below her ear that makes the room decide to be good. Arya sends pages still, not because she needs me, but because ritual has its own truth. I make a suggestion here and there, cut a flourish that hides a bruise, remind a paragraph how to breathe. When version history tells me someone else is in the dock, I do not click. I take my hands off the keyboard. I go to the sink and wash a glass. I return to bed with cold fingers and warm intentions. If I'm lucky, the only revision I need that night fits into a sentence without a track change. Stay.